Okay, well, I think we'd better just go ahead and start. So, oh, I am going to close the door. And I did have a couple people ask if I was going to record this, and I am recording it. So, if you want to refer back, they'll be online. If you want to share it with people, you can do that. So welcome to this little session on digital storytelling. I was telling a couple folks earlier, actually, can we do names? Since there's not that many of us here, can we do names? I'm Kyle.
I'm Anika.
Okay.
Shen Shen.
Say it one more time.
Shen Shen.
Shen Shen.
Yeah.
Lexi. Lexi, Shen Shen, and Anika.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So a couple of us were talking before we got started here about what do I sort of mean by digital storytelling. I think there's this sort of broad sense of digital storytelling, right? Of like telling a story using digital tools, and so in some sense that's what filmmakers do, and that's what TV producers do, and that sort of thing. And so obviously this is like a hugely broad field if you think of it sort of from that perspective. I'm sort of zooming in to this notion of digital storytelling as kind of a genre, and it's kind of I want to say kind of a teaching genre or a learning genre or something like that. There's this place called the Center for Digital Storytelling that for something like 20-25 years, since like before it was easy to do this, went around and did these workshops on helping people tell short 3 to 4 minute stories using video. And they do this for, I've seen them do workshops for health workers, workshops for various immigrant groups. They really see digital storytelling as a means of, sort of exploring meaning in one's setting from a like very personal perspective. And so they have this sort of form that they teach and the method that they teach. And I took one of their workshops a few years ago and have since been using digital stories in religious settings. I'm a religious educator by trade. And so I teach church people how to do this for the purposes of exploring their faith generally, or sometimes for the purposes of engaging with religious texts. So what is it like to use some of these techniques to tell a story, or to retell or to remix a story from scripture or something like that. So that's kind of my experience and where I'm sort of coming from in all this. So, all of these iDesign workshops are these sort of multi-session workshops. What I want to do today is sort of introduce this genre. And mostly I want to watch some videos and talk about them and expose you to some good ones and some maybe not so good ones. God help us, one that I did. And just give us a chance to like start thinking about where this might be useful in our own teaching, if this might be useful for the media making assignment, for instance, in Lolita's media and culture class. And so just sort of get our creative juices flowing a little bit. And then I'll talk a little bit about this process that the Center for Digital Storytelling, which actually, I guess they now call themselves Story Center. They did a rebrand a year or two ago. So I'll sort of share these steps that Story Center kind of recommends and say a little bit about technology. If you're hoping to get like lots of technology tips, this is definitely not the individual session for you, and I'm probably not the teacher for you. I was telling several people, I'm very much an amateur video editor. I'm mostly use the really basic tools because I'm mostly working with people who only have access to the really basic tools. But I think that is part of what makes this powerful, is that, as you'll see, it's a relatively simple form to get started with. So we'll talk a little bit about process and about technology. And then in the later sessions, we'll go into a little more depth. So what I want to do in the next session is actually kind of do some planning on a story. So hopefully by then people will have thought about, and I know like for Lalitha's class, the proposals due fairly soon of like what issue we're going to make the media assignment about. So what I want to do next time is really sort of start to workshop what it's like to actually kind of design one of these videos. And then we'll have a couple of open work sessions where people can bring their computers or use these computers and work together, and maybe we can show some clips as we go, that sort of thing. And then at the end of the semester, if anyone's left standing, we'll show some videos. We'll have popcorn, and it'll be fun. So that's kind of the trajectory. Does that sound good? Cool. Okay, so let's watch some videos. This first one I use a lot. I really like it, partly because it's really simple. So let's watch Las Abuelas and be thinking about what you notice.
If it's a hard day, I make tortillas for dinner. If it's a special day, like a birthday or a friend coming to visit, I make tortillas for dinner. The smell of warm milk, working the dough with my hands until it's just the right amount of sticky, shaping it into balls and letting them rest before rolling them out. I make tortillas like my mom does. She learned from her mother, and so on, as far back as collective family memory goes. My grandmother was one of the Californianos, known in our family as Las Abuelas. These women considered themselves Californians first. My grandmother's aunt always described the Yankees as invaders, and we generally never pointed out that California is now a state. Other traditions changed or faded, but the tortilla recipe hasn't changed a bit. I always think of my grandmother when I make them. I wonder if she always thought of her grandmother. My grandmother was famous for having people over to dinner. Lots and lots of people. As a kid, my mom felt sorry for people who went out to dinner. She figured they must be deprived since they didn't get to eat at home. When I was growing up, there were always lots of people eating in our house too. The center of activity was the kitchen. Everything really important happened there. I never made tortillas by myself until I went away to college. I called my mom. How much milk? How much flour? She said, for the milk, it depends on how many you want to make. For the flour, until it looks right. You'll know. And they did. I love having people over to dinner. They'll sometimes say, oh, you don't have to do that. We can just go out. We could, but that's not the point. For me, it's not just about the food.
So what did you notice in that story? What jumped out at you?
First, that technically was super simple.
Yeah.
The important, it was the narrator on the story that she was telling, and the images were just the same scene all the time, and a few photos, nothing else.
Yeah.
And that was enough to tell this story in a meaningful way.
Yeah, very technically simple, like one contiguous clip. It's not well lit. It's not, it's not any sort of like fancy clip of someone rolling tortillas, and then some simple photos imposed over. And what do the photos do? Like what's their function in this video? Any thoughts?
I think they're like a backup story for
family.
What
What do you mean by a backup story?
I think her voice, she was telling like stories about her family, and those like images and also the videos are like kind of a backup to
Okay, yeah, like more concrete maybe? Like, yeah, like we can kind of like picture what it's like to be a part of her family, right? I think the videos or the photos for the most part there's sort of like a uncomplicated relationship between the narration and the photo. Like, oftentimes, she said like, my grandma was famous for having people over to dinner, and you see this table that's set with, rolls and, and all this stuff. And that, so there's sort of a simple one-to-one correspondence. It's not a metaphor. It's just, she's mostly showing you, sort of helping you picture what it's like to be a part of this family. Although some of them I think are at least partly metaphorical, right? There was the picture of, hang on, go back. I should turn off autoplay. Can I do that easily? Does anybody know how to turn off autoplay easily? I should do that one of these days. Let's just, there we go. I thought that this one was pretty evocative, right? Like, I don't know if this is her and her mother on the beach or not, but I thought that one was like that photo I thought really captured the kind of idea of like having a heart to heart with mom. I don't know if, she said she called her mom, didn't like go out walking on the beach with her mom. But I think this image like summons up for us a sort of notion of a family, sort of heart to heart conversation. So a few of the photos I think do a little more work than just illustrating. I think there's some like metaphorical meaning happening from some of these photos. Anything else you noticed? Jumped out at you? What about the music? What did you think of the music? Nothing in particular? Warm, yeah. I think the music doesn't knock you over, which is a good thing. I think there's a temptation to overdo it with the music. I also like, for me, it's like really repetitious. And so it kind of underscores that throughout this whole video, we've got this kind of constant sort of motion, it's repetitive. I thought in that sense, it sort of highlighted something about what it's like to make these tortillas, right? It's just like a repetitive process and the kind of thing where you could have a conversation, she's talking about this experience of, she has people over and makes tortillas, and you can kind of picture them in the kitchen talking. So for me, the music underscores that point, but another person might feel a different way, right? That's one of the things that's, I think, really valuable about digital storytelling is that it forces us both as producers and as viewers to think about aesthetic choices and the meaning that they communicate. And to me, that's one of the really valuable learning outcomes. And whether you want to call that visual literacy or whether, however you want to refer to that sort of that task, that meaning making task, I think is valuable in a lot of different settings. Okay, let's watch another one. This is a new one for me. I've only watched it a couple times. Usually I'm doing this with religious people, and so I show a bunch of religious things, and so I wanted to get those out. And I thought this one might be, in a room full of educators, might be interesting to folks. So this one's called Progression.
I sit on a hard plastic chair at a desk across from my teacher. My eyes well up and my throat tightens. She continues with a bombardment of challenging questions, taking note of each answer, judging my level of competence and intellect with slews of tests designed to evaluate me. This is not my first exam, and I know it won't be my last. A grade or two behind has been my norm, and dyslexia has been the consensus from the beginning. They know my early struggles with the alphabet, my challenges to read and write simple sentences. Sounding out words and remembering them was tough. Discouraged, I ask, did I get it right? Hoping my best effort is correct. Uncomfortably, she pauses. My hopes diminish. I want to be good enough. I want to be smart like the other students in class. Why am I like this? Tears spill from the wells in my eyes and fall off my chin and onto my striped shirt. The other kids are going to ask me again, why do you have to go to another room? They called the resource program the retard class. I sit on a wooden chair with a small pillow at a different desk, this time in front of my tutor. She is kind and empathetic, holding a safe place for me. We have been working on the BDP sheet, and I notice I'm beginning to make connections. She expresses appreciation for my efforts. 36, she says, as she places a gold star at the top of my paper. 7 better than last time. I feel my face brighten and a smile parts my lips. I feel proud. She compares my performance only with my previous results and not with the other kids. She teaches in a way where observation is more important than evaluation. I connect with myself and begin to see I'm making progress.
So what did you notice here? Very different sort of story. What jumped out at you?
And he was able to share his experience struggling in school and how much the tutor has helped him and brought like comfort for him in order to succeed in his academics. So that was pretty touching.
Yeah, that the contrast, when he starts talking about that new tutor, I thought that was very stark
And then he
and effective.
was in detail with the tasks that he did, that he completed,
Mm-hmm.
the alphabets and
Yeah. Thanks. I think that's right. Please.
And I also noticed the narration is like pretty much like in a diary style, and then
In a what? I'm sorry.
In a diary.
Oh yeah, in a diary. Yeah.
A diary style, and then the picture moves like really slow, and there's no music involved, and then just let the readers or the audience like deeply get connect with this author or the speaker. And also I noticed like in between the transaction, there's like a black moment.
Yeah.
Like they happen twice. It really give people the time to think about or to feel the feeling the authors had at the time.
Yeah, does anyone remember what went along with that first black? I'm trying to remember something. I thought it was really effective. I can't remember exactly.
I think he said like he got lower points or something like that. And
yeah.
About it, but it's really a very sad moment, and he's really disappointed about himself.
Yeah.
It's really very dark period for himself.
Yeah. It was sort of the pivot point. Right. That first fade to black was what the whole story sort of hinged on. Yeah, I agree. Please.
And also there is this construct between the alphabet and all those things that they were trying to teach him and the art part.
Yeah.
It's like why these people are not discovering this other side of this poor little boy, and they are just focusing on this other side of this struggling. So that contrast made also more dramatic.
Yeah.
The story.
Yeah. The contrast between the images and the sort of abstract images and the letters.
Expressive images.
Yeah. And the contrast too, I thought, between the abstract images and the more pictorial images.
Yeah.
Like I thought it was really telling that he has that moment of success. And rather than the sort of abstract watercolor, we get the drawing with the sun and the smiling kid. It was like a moment of clarity, I thought. So yeah, I one of the things they really stressed when I took the workshop was this way that these images can work in lots of different ways, and they really encourage you to be creative about that. When we watch mine in a second here, you'll see mine's pretty literal. Like I'm trying to sort of move through the space of a day in New York, and so the images are pretty broadly representative and depictual, sort of like in the first one. But yeah, this one just uses images in a much more creative, interesting way. But it depends on the goals, right? And I think this person's trying to capture a feeling that is like abstract, I think, and is it's connected to language and the at times inaccessibility of language or the confusion of language or so I think the images really work effectively for what he's doing. I also wanted to go for those of us in Melitha's class. I was really reminded in this one of I read for the graphic novel. I read Fun Home, and that point you made about the diary, I think really like resonated. I'm assuming that this stuff was his art. Maybe not. I don't know, but it felt like to me, obviously this is an adult reflecting on his experience as a child, and I thought the way he talked and the way he used the art that he did kind of gave it that. I was reminded of Fun Home, of all the way that the author of Fun Home in this graphic novel like brings in all of these like pieces from her diary and pieces of art that she did as a kid, and I think that's one of the really cool things about the medium of video is that it lets us bring in all of those different artifacts and sort of weave them into something cohesive. Anything else you want to say about this one? Okay, let's watch one more, and this is one that I did, and I'm showing it not because I think it's some kind of amazing example, but because when we talk through the process, I can tell you at least what I was thinking and what I was trying to do, and I feel like the exercise of talking through the process of doing one of these will be a lot less abstract if we watch something where I can tell you, here's how the process worked in this particular case. So with the caveat that it is nothing special, here is the story that I produced when I did this workshop.
My crooked spine protests at the morning spent in crowds, one shoulder slung with back issues and swag. It's no mean feat navigating New York Comic-Con, the meat grinder, one writer calls it. Excuse me, Swamp Thing. Excuse me, shirtless Mario Brothers. Excuse me, huntress with the impossibly oversized scimitar. I'm here on pilgrimage, it's fair to say. I've devoured 137 episodes of a podcast in the style of old-time radio. Each week I share in a few moments of riotous alchemy, laughter, daring playfulness, improbable generosity. And for me and a club full of my particular subspecies,
This happened to me in Lolita's class too. We were watching my video and it stalled out. I have no idea why. Yeah, no, I have not monetized my YouTube channel. Why would that be happening?
protect.
Buffer. Oops. Huh.
Okay, great.
I have no idea what this is all about.
The 8 will drop live in Park Slope.
Okay.
Will drop live in Park. Species of nerd Number 138 will drop live in Park Slope. Gotham's unforgiving to we out-of-towners, we sleepers on cousins' couches, we novices in the cult of the G-train. As if to mock me, my subway companion as I leave the hall carts a tuba, but still has a hand free for a game on his Samsung Galaxy. I finally locate the neighborhood shop where the writers and players are doing autographs before a call, but I figure I must be early. I recognize the gang from blurry photos, indie movies, and of course, their voices. But they almost outnumber the fans beginning to line up. Fans holding merchandise, but also bottles or champagne flutes. Turns out I'm right on time. I meet some other pilgrims, share convention stories with the actors heading there tomorrow for their panel. I talk Muppets and Fraggles with a producer who worked for Henson. And I get over myself long enough to pose with Sparks Nevada, Marshall on Mars. The show tonight will be thrilling and exuberant, of course. But the trek is already worth it for this hour's gathering over Brooklyn lagers amid the discounted trade paperbacks. The perfect place for everyone involved to say thank you and mean it.
So what did you notice about this one? I just find it somewhat uncomfortable talking about my live video, but
I like the way you use the images. It looks like you have a large image, but you zoom into a specific part, or so it creates a motion. Also, you don't use lots of videos, but it does look like a video. So I like the transition from one image to another one. So it's really smooth. Consistent.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I think that's one of the another one of the sort of unexpectedly powerful things about this medium is like how much you can actually do with a photograph, especially a high resolution one. You know, the lower res, you know, it's a little harder. But yeah, you can do, you know, they call that the Ken Burns effect because those Ken Burns documentaries do that slow zoom and whatnot. But yeah, you can use it to, you can use a pan and zoom to sort of imitate motion, you know, through a still photograph or whatever. You can, there were a couple of them where the fades, you know, you can sort of simulate time passing if you fade in and fade out, like there was like a sunrise one, and there was the lights one that it got stuck on. And just through a fade in and fade out, it looks like those lights are actually, you know, changing. So there's a sense in which you can do video-like things even with photographs, which I think is cool. Anything else about this one?
I like music, apart from the visual things.
Oh,
Yeah, music is, I think it just fits in, but you have written for the. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things I was trying to do with the music is, you know, for me, this story, and we'll talk through the process in a second, but for me, one of the things, you know, I'm spoiling this here a little bit, but one of the things they really encourage you to do, and this is, you know, I think a broader point about storytelling, is to identify that pivot point. Like, where is the moment where your story achieved or started to show the meaning that you're trying to communicate? And, you know, for me, it's the pivot point. And, you know, when I did this, I wasn't living in New York. I was very intimidated by New York. And so to me, the contrast between the totally overwhelming experience of being at Comic-Con, you know, in the giant hall, in the meat grinder, and then crossing over into Brooklyn to this like little manageable neighborhood. And, you know, there were like 10 people at this little comic book store, and the people that I came to see were just hanging out. Like, that contrast was really stark. And for me, the music was partly about trying to capture the atmosphere of those two different places. So yeah, I think music, I think it's important not to overdo it with the music, but I think strategic musical choices can create a sort of tone, and can create contrast. Anything else anyone wants to say about this?
What is meat then?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah.
What is that?
I guess it's a way to describe the comic because I really, really.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, a meat grinder is like a physical machine
Right,
to grind
Yeah, so
meat.
I
So,
was like thinking,
yeah.
how is there like a meaty?
Yeah. No. Yeah, it's a metaphor for like the idea of like squeezing all these people. You use it like to make sausage. You grind the meat and then you stuff it in the, yeah. I have often regretted that choice. They another thing that they encourage you to think about is sort of non-obvious title, but something that kind of gets at the meaning you're trying to communicate. I always feel a little weird about that, actually, in retrospect. I'm not sure I would name it the same thing if I did it again, but that is the creative process. Sometimes you make good choices and sometimes less so. Okay, let's go back to the slides here. So having seen a few of these now, what kind of learning do you think this learning activity or this teaching tool, and I think it can be both of those things, what kind of learning do you think this form, this genre encourages? Attitude? Yeah, same one.
It will mostly increase attitude. We just saw the video before. I think someone with similar problems in learning, so if they see this kind of video, they might be encouraged.
Yeah.
You might gain some confidence, or you might have some interest in the view.
Yeah.
Attitude might be the first thing.
Yeah, attitude and empathy and yeah. I think these are, it's no coincidence that video is one of our major entertainment mediums, right? Like this audio and video have like a real power to reach us in ways that the written word sometimes doesn't. I heard recently an interview with Malcolm Gladwell, the author, who just did a podcast series called Revisionist History. And it was really interesting hearing this, lifelong writer, journalist, reflect on what it was like to make a podcast. And he's like, man, I mean, I'm a great writer in a lot of ways, but I'm never gonna like tug on someone's heartstrings with my writing. But when I go and do an interview for the podcast and play that audio, like it can really shape people's attitudes. It can really, make an emotional connection with the audience, and I think that's important. Sorry, I cut you off.
I just wanted to add on to what she said. The video with the child who was struggling in school. I would definitely show that video to teachers, to children who are struggling, and they feel they're not motivated. So if I was to show that video, short and sweet, straight to the point, they may begin to think and say, well, if he could do it, then I can do it. I understand, because what he was going through, I see that a lot in the public schools. These children are struggling in that area, especially students with special needs.
Yeah.
So they would begin to, the video could be a motivation for them.
Yeah.
And to seek assistance, because some of them are so ashamed to ask for help.
Yeah. So. Yeah. My mom was a special ed teacher, and I remember one day watching with her some like training video she was watching, and it was about all these exercises that special ed teachers were using to train non-special ed teachers, basically in building empathy. So it was all these exercises that sort of simulated what it is like to be dyslexic or to have other kinds of, visual and textual, I'm sorry, I don't know the terminology, learning disabilities. And, that video in 2 or 3 minutes did the job that that like 45-minute seminar that I watched with my mom did. Yeah, really, really powerful.
The students are able to make connections.
Yeah. I think that point about making connections and synthesis, I think that's really a big one. I do think that digital stories can be, so we've said some things already, like there's some like emotional learning that happens in the making of them and in the watching of them. I think there's lots of literacy work, right? There's, digital literacy and technical literacy and visual literacy and, the working with these materials and shaping them and interpreting them, that, has, I think, all kinds of value in and of itself. But I think in terms of teaching content, I think making connections is really good. I think a digital story can help a student, and digital stories as assessment tools can help demonstrate, synthesis, right? Like they bring together themes and ideas, and you're sort of knitting or weaving, I think, with video, and so there's a certain kind of assessment that these would be really good for. I'll add one more. The part of what got me involved in this work is that I worked for 4 years at an Episcopal seminary. So one of the sort of classes that everyone takes is a Bible class, and one of our instructors, one of her major learning goals for the Intro to Old Testament, Hebrew Bible course, is to help students realize that it's not like someone just sat down and wrote the Bible, like from beginning to end. It's this collection of texts knitted together over thousands of years on, scraps of parchment. And later on, somebody decided, how to bind it together and what should be in and what should be out. And this is like actually a really hard thing to teach to religious people. They think that it's this, thing that God like dictated or whatever, when really it's a remix is what is the teaching tool that she uses. It's a remix of all kinds of social and cultural and religious texts that sort of came down and were eventually sort of stitched together. And so she used the idea of remixing a Bible story to try to get at that, that the experience of trying to tell a digital story about a particular passage of scripture actually sort of simulates what it was like when the Bible was being assembled. So I think engaging in a deep and thoughtful way with a text, or with some kind of narrative that's already there, and sort of remixing it in a very sort of Henry Jenkins way, I think is another possible reason why you might want to use a digital storytelling assignment in all kinds of courses. Anything else anyone wants to say about what kind of learning? I think we've covered a lot of things. I was amazed when I took the workshop. Obviously mine was pretty lighthearted. I wanted to do something fun, and it was sort of a fandom thing. I loved this podcast and wanted to make something about it. But I was amazed at how many of the people in my cohort did stories like the first and the second story, and especially like the second. A lot of people told stories from their childhood, and you could tell that this was a way to sort of like do some important personal identity kind of work. And they do a lot of these workshops with people in really intense service fields, with doctors and nurses and other kinds of public health folks, as a way of like helping them process their experiences, as a kind of almost a kind of therapy. And so there's that too. So I just think there's a lot of richness here and a lot of potential. So let me briefly, I think we're doing good on time. Let me briefly just talk through, this is the sort of 7 steps. This is the design process that they recommend for putting one of these things together. And you'll notice that the sort of technical stuff, choosing images, choosing sound, doing all kinds of video editing and sharing things on YouTube. The technical stuff happens way later. As you know, in any good design process, right? Like there's some big critical questions we have to ask in the early going before we sort of dive in. A friend of mine wrote a book about religious education in the era of digital media, and her sort of mantra in that book is message, method, and then media. You know, figure out what you want to say first. You know, obvious point, but it's amazing how fast we want to go to how something could look rather than what it might say. So so they really encourage you to spend some time really sort of like claiming like whatever story you want to tell. What did you learn from it? Like what if there's not some kind of learning or change that happened, then why do you want to tell it? And so, and they had, you know, some activities that we went through with that, and we'll do a little bit of this kind of thing next time. You know, okay, after you figured out kind of what's the point of your story, what emotions were you feeling in the midst of it? Like, again, with mine, you know, the point that I wanted to make was basically that I went to this event and experienced like unexpected hospitality, right? Like unexpected connection to people who don't know me at all, but who I really look up to and enjoy their work. You know, so that like unexpected gratitude was kind of what was happening there for me. And so for me, the sort of the emotions of the story in the first half was this sort of sense of being overwhelmed, right? And being in this giant convention center with all these people, and then, you know, being on the subway and just being intimidated by that, and then to have this very different emotional tone later of sort of being relaxed, feeling connected, very personal as opposed to the impersonal. So, you know, I think any story has a sort of emotional arc to it. And then the second step, that's what they want to sort of get you thinking about. I sort of wonder what it would be like with some of these stories to try to like assign a color to the emotion in any given moment, and to see how that color like changes over the course of the story. And I don't know why that seems like a useful exercise to me, but you know, I think you want to think about sort of mapping the emotional journey that you're hoping ultimately to take people on with you. So you heard me talk several times about the sort of pivot points of these stories, and I think in a lot of ways this is the most challenging part of the process for people, is to sort of find the place around which the story sort of revolves. You know, pivot point, you know, I guess the sort of elementary school literature class would call that the, you know, I don't know, the climax or the turning point or whatever. I don't know what the right exact word, and they're intentionally vague about it, right? They say find the moment. I think it's no coincidence that in my story and in that second story, the moment kind of happens when there's a fade out. You know, that's the fade out sort of serves as this tool of communicating, hey, something happened here, and things are about to change. So that was the thing that I struggled with the most, and I think that's pretty common. But I think a lot of the decisions that follow will depend on choosing wisely where you want to sort of orient the trajectory of your story. Does that make sense? Okay. See your story and hear your story. I think we kind of talked about these a little bit as we were watching the stories. Obviously, visuals, both the components and the transitions between them, and what might be happening in the midst of seeing a particular visual, I think is really important. A couple of very practical things that they taught us that I found helpful and that I've used a lot with people I've worked with on these things. they say, be really careful with the Ken Burns. I don't know if you noticed it in some of the other one, or in the second one, it felt like we were panning, I think on like every shot. And the pan was slow, so it wasn't distracting to me in this case, but I've seen some first drafts of videos where every single photograph, there's like this intense zoom in or zoom out, and your eyes get really tired. And I didn't, after the experience of having them tell me that, of saying, you know, don't have your camera move on every shot, I started paying more attention in movies. And there's an awful lot of the time when the camera is not moving, you know, and that's partly because the thing the camera is looking at is usually moving. And if you're mostly using photographs, that's not going to be the case. But I think what it gets at is, if the whole thing is sort of frenetic in its motion, we get a little bit overwhelmed. The metaphor they used was give people's eyes a chance to rest. So my sort of rule of thumb, you know, what was to not move unless there was like a reason to move, and to make sure that I wasn't doing that more often than every other image or so. And I think the same is true for transitions. Some of them were really smooth, some of them were fade in, fade out, and other times they just changed. And I think that's okay. The other thing I'll say is there's almost no reason to do any kind of transition other than what they call a crossfade. You know, fade into one, from one into the other, or fade to black, or fade in from black, or whatever. But, you know, just like with PowerPoint slides, you can do all the fancy transitions. I think in this medium in particular, there's just almost no reason to do that, unless you're trying to communicate something really specific. You know, like WeVideo has a checkerboard transition where it's like the second image comes in halfway, like sort of every other square, like a checkerboard, and then the second piece comes in. What does that mean? You know, and if this activity is about meaning, unless you're reflecting on, you know, the experience of living on a grid, or unless your video is about chess, I just don't know why you would use that. And so be pretty careful with anything but a fade or a dissolve, I think. Their sort of rule of thumb for actually putting your story together was to try really hard to not go over 3 minutes or so. That just seems to be kind of a sweet spot, that, you know, people, you know, you can, as a sort of amateur video maker, you know, you can hold people's attention for 2 or 3 minutes, and after that it gets pretty hard. And I think they recommended trying to keep it to 250 words, which is not a lot of words. You know, you can, you know, your mileage may vary, but I think in all 3 of those stories, the narration went pretty slowly. And I think that was always intentional. You know, if the goal is to take people on a journey, you want to make sure they stay with you. And when the writing is really dense, I think it's easy to get out ahead of people and have them just get lost. So I think that's an argument for going slowly. I think there are some cases where you might want to move fast. Maybe that's part of what you're trying to communicate. But I found that advice helpful, to go slowly, keep it to 3 minutes. I'll say a little more about tools in a second. And then they really made a big point of emphasizing how important it was in this process to make sure that you shared your story, to make sure that, you know, anyone who got through it and physically produced something, even if it was a really rough cut, we watched them, all of them, at the end of this. And I have joined Nathan's Snow Day Lab, and that came up in some research that Sam, I don't know Sam's last name, but some research that she was doing in a sort of week-long maker activity. She said, it's really important that at the end of the week, they be able to show what they made. if you're trying to institute a mindset of making, you know, if constructionism is important to you, you want people to reach the point where they can share something and to find an audience. And so I think it's really important if you use this as a learning activity to build in some time for everyone to watch theirs. And I think I realized that again, how important that part of it was when we were doing the Where I'm From videos in Lalitha's class. Those of you in the class know that my YouTube video did that exact same thing. I don't know why I have that buffering lock, but so it was looking like people weren't going to get to see my video because 25 seconds in, it froze. And I was amazed at like how, you know, I mean, I would have gotten over it. But in the moment, I had a really palpable emotional reaction to the thought that I did all that work and no one was going to actually see it. And so that just like reminded me of how important this sharing step really is. So again, I've been doing this work with people who are not technical experts. And I think a lot of where this is really powerful is, you know, is just giving young people, giving people who maybe think they don't have the skills to be a digital storyteller, the chance to do that. So I have generally recommended either iMovie, or if people are PC users, I've typically recommended this this web-based browser, or I'm sorry, this browser-based editor, excuse me, called WeVideo. I know, I guess nowadays this doesn't seem that weird. When I took this workshop 3 or 4 years ago, I was like, are you kidding me? A browser-based editor is not going to crash all the time and is not going to, and actually, to be honest, I prefer WeVideo to GarageBand. I think it's a little more powerful. It's free to use, but of course there's limits on how much video you can export and all that kind of thing. We got a sort of upgraded account as part of this learning experience. And WeVideo is really good about doing student rates and stuff. So if you were doing this in a school setting, you know, I'd encourage you to seek after one of those sort of education rate packages. But WeVideo is definitely worth thinking about if you're using this with a group. I just found it to be a really pleasant and intuitive experience. More intuitive, I think, than with iMovie. I know Apple prides themselves on intuitive software, but and I think iMovie's gotten better. The most recent iMovie to me seems a little bit easier to use, but importing and exporting video, I just still think is needlessly complicated in iMovie. So a few resources to commend as we wind down here, and then we can do some questions. WeVideo has their own sort of academy. Of course, there's a million iMovie tutorials and any software platform. If you want to learn to use Premiere, if you want to learn to use, what's the other? Final Cut, yeah. You know, anything you need to be able to do, almost, there's a YouTube video showing you how to do it. So Google's your friend. I really like, I forget if this one is it or not, but I was saying earlier, Vimeo has a video school where they show you how to do a lot of stuff, including how to shoot pretty decent video on a smartphone. So if people want to be using a lot of actual video clips, you know, there's some good tools you can give them for trying to get good video on a smartphone. If you're interested in implementing this in a course, here's a few, you know, sort of more or less scholarly write-ups of implementations of this in various courses. This is actually a video of my colleagues presenting about the digital storytelling class, you know, in a humanities setting that we did. And then this website, and I'll go back to the URL where all this is, and they'll also be on the iDesign website, so you'll have access to all these links. This website in particular, it's called like Educational Uses of Digital Storytelling, and it's got lots of ideas for different ways of using this tool, and lots of examples. And I spent some time on it yesterday. I didn't know about the site, and it's really rich. So that's what I've got as a sort of introduction. Does anybody have questions or comments? You think you could teach people how to make a video? You think you want to make a video yourself? Maybe. How much experience have people edited video before? You as individuals? Some, a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll go back to the first slide because it's got the if you want these slides immediately, here's the link. But I'll put a PDF on the iDesign website too, which is just tc.blah/iDesign. So for the next next week is part 2 of this workshop, and what I actually want to do is spend some time, probably in pairs, actually starting to think about a story that you want to tell. So this is going to get increasingly experiential as we go. So I'd encourage you to challenge yourself to make a video. Again, if you're in Melitha's class or another class where you need to make a video, even better. Certainly you don't have to follow the 7 canonical steps of this. If you're if you want to make a video in a different genre, these principles I think are still really helpful to think about. And the notion of making a video mostly with photographs and voiceover, I think is really powerful. So yeah, if you're interested in coming back, I hope you'll bring an idea of a story you want to tell or a video you want to make, and we'll actually do some exercises together. And sessions 3 and 4 are just sort of like open work time. I think most of these machines have various editing tools on them. So you can bring your own, or you can work on one of these machines. And I think, working on this stuff together is really helpful because we can learn tricks from each other and that sort of thing. I'm happy to demo some things if that would be helpful. Again, I'm not an expert, but so that's kind of the plan. Does that sound good? Do you think you might come back? I mean, you don't have to commit now, but are you thinking about coming back? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great. It's a little time consuming, but I think it's really valuable. And if it gets you through an assignment, even better. Anything else anyone wants to say?
That's a question.
Yeah.
So, the thing that goes into my mind, right? What are all the different kinds of, I guess, I don't want to use the term pragmatic or practical, but for me, kind of where can I use storytelling to help myself? Right?
Yeah.
I just want to
sure.
I want to put in the work only to say,
yeah.
So, I was just thinking about the portfolio stuff.
Yeah.
And I often the portfolio think about there are skills and there are traits across. And one of the things that I noticed about these things, they're very personal.
Yeah.
Right, kinds of things. You get a sense of what's going on and that part. I was wondering what you thought about, like, for example, with a portfolio, I think you go over a lot of people go over the thought process of skills and professional traits. But let's be real, right? Like, I mean, getting people into your workplace and having to work with them for like the next 5 years, someone nice. So there's a personal side also helps, which I think interviews. I mean, would a story about yourself, somewhat personal, somewhat professional, be something that could be like the opening of a portfolio,
I think so. Yeah, I absolutely think so. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, these examples were all personal, and Story Center's work sort of leans in that direction.
Yeah.
So no coincidence. But certainly, I think many of these same principles apply. And there were people who were participating in the workshop who were doing more sort of like advocacy, type things, and wanted to do sort of issue videos. So that's like a whole area of some pragmatism. But I agree. I think a video like this, maybe that sort of answered the question of like how I became a designer, how I became or some version of that. Yeah, how did I end up here? Like, yeah, I think that. I mean, I'm no expert. I don't do a lot of hiring, but I think that something like that has a place, absolutely. Especially in the sort of gig economy, you know, like I think where, you know, you're like, okay, I've got these people to choose from, but I don't know them, you know. I mean, in my work for the last 4 years, I've basically been a professional development officer at this school, and so like my job was connecting with and getting opportunities to go and teach people I had never met before. So communicating something about who I was to those people in advance was really important, and I think this medium can do that. So yeah, I'll definitely, as I work on my portfolio, I'm definitely going to think about maybe not the Comic-Con one, but I might put the Where I'm From video, the one that I did for Letha's class. That is, it's sort of like a celebration of amateurish media making, and that sort of says who I am as a minister and as a you know, as a consultant. And yeah, I'd probably put it on my portfolio.
I can see how elements of storytelling they, you know, process that.
Yeah.
What's that storytelling about you and the product?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and especially getting at the, you know, I feel like we were talking yesterday, like you're making an implicit argument for the fact that you can do a certain job and you can do it in a certain way. And that notion of a turning point, I think like several of the pieces we looked at, I think were about sort of like trying to get at how someone ultimately broke open a problem and how they like found, you know, a sort of nugget of insight that brought them to the solution that they did. And yeah, I think that kind of that's a story. Totally.
And related to that, I always have tried to put it in my portfolio, and I don't know how to put it, and this could be a solution. That how it works, like my backstage process of design. That is super interesting for other people that are trying to, I don't know, see if you can fit in her team. That maybe she works in a kind of she thinks, but the way that you work sometimes reflect the way that you think and how you process your projects and your things. So maybe it could be a good idea to build something about how you think about something, what is your design process,
Yeah.
how you work.
Yeah.
It's related to craft.
Those hidden things that aren't explicitly like available on the surface that people see. Right?
Yeah.
Even now that I'm thinking about it, even when Apple comes out with a product every year, right? And then they always have a video, like the keynote video, right? And then they also have this product story video. And again, I don't know if like this digital storytelling is about telling stories about oneself, but, but I always feel like, you know, they talk about all the new features, but also like the design process of new things. And you wouldn't know like what nobody in America knew what chamfered edge was until they mentioned why it's so significant and the behind it, the problem it's solved.
Yeah.
So like for things like that too, I think.
Yeah.
I feel like in the way that you were talking about storytelling, there are lots of elements that are similar, universal to design.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I talk also about concept of design firms. But even storytelling, you know, to like products, to whatever it is, process of kind of thinking about the message.
Yeah.
How to do it, talking to the song, and using the tools and techniques
Yeah.
to achieve those. Always fascinating.
Yeah. I remember in one of the sample portfolios we looked at yesterday, there was, and if you need to go, by the way, go. I mean, I guess we're over 2:00, so don't feel like the conversation is forcing you to stay. But we were watching that one of the portfolio projects I remember was a little bit like a storytelling, you know, like I can't remember what the actual thing. Oh, it was this person had designed a social media campaign. And so at the top were the actual artifacts as you know, were the things that would definitely be in a portfolio, right? Like here's the thing we made. But then down below that was the process stuff. And that was like, she showed her pitch deck from the original, you know, and like, so the design process is constantly creating these artifacts. If it's a digital type design, they're likely digital artifacts already, but they're probably visual. And they probably communicate something about you too. I mean, I love seeing people's, doodles and sketches. And I mean, I trained as an engineer. So, I mean, like looking at people's like early mock-ups of things and, how they sketch on a napkin, to use the cliche, I think says a lot about them. And often, I love it when a final product has its roots on a napkin, and you get to like see, here's where we first wrote down the idea. So yeah, I really think the design process, the process of reflecting on the design process might really lend itself well to storytelling techniques. I think you're right. Yeah.
I did not receive the email about the e-portfolio. Will there be another workshop?
Oh yeah. Jen, you want to say something about that?
Yeah, so there's a sign right up there that says design portfolio workshop, but I had a first one yesterday, and we're going to have another one, second part. 3 days or something?
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah. The dates are on
I
there.
don't get the emails either.
Yeah.
So just check it out.
On the screen, if we can find it.
Oh yeah, actually we
yeah.
recorded it. Kyle generously listed it for us. So we're going to try to archive these so in case people missed them, you can actually watch it and then join the next one.
So my uni is the second one listed there under GA. If you send me an email, I can send you the link. Yeah, those emails probably go. I forget. Are you in this department or are you in another department?
This department.
Oh, you are in this department. Oh, okay.
I don't know why
I
didn't
wonder.
get the email.
Yeah, weird. Okay. Well, anyway,
Okay.
send me an email. And I can send you the recording of the first one.
I have a question about this workshop, like the following session. And they're gonna focus on how to teach us to convince the story, or it will teach us how to use the tool to.
It's good. I think more on the sort of design type stuff. Like what I want to do is spend some time next week with those definitely the first few steps, and then thinking out a little further visually. But so think of it, I think, as a series of exercises to help you start planning, and then the technical how-to stuff we'll get to in those open sessions where people can just bring their work. And if you just bring a bunch of media with you on that first day, we can, if you haven't done this before, we can show you how to start dropping it in your timeline and start working with it. So yeah, the technical stuff I think will be in 3 and 4, and it'll be very much like as needed, and kind of one-on-one around the room. But the next session is going to be come with an idea of what video you want to make, and we'll start asking some of those questions together, like in pairs, and kind of talk through it a little bit and pitch each other.
So I have a question. What makes a good story? And like, what makes not a good story? So we probably all have ideas, right? Like, ooh, this sounds like I would make a story, but maybe is there a good story in everything? Or are there some kinds of things that don't lend themselves to? How do you know?
Yeah.
Right? Like, how do you know the trees from the forest?
Yeah.
You're going up the right alley.
Yeah.
I think I thought about this question before because I was a business major when I was in undergrad, and then the counselor would have us to build our resume and to do the mock interview. She always tell us when you do the internship, when you do the interview, just think about you're gonna tell the employee a story about yourself, and then she told us what is the real story? Just convincing them if the story is strong enough to convince that person in front of you that maybe there's considered to be the story.
Convince them what? Convince
them the message you want to deliver. No matter what kind of message you want to deliver. The point.
Yeah. So story as communicating an idea. Yeah, I think having a clear message is probably an important part of storytelling. I would agree with that. I also think certainly I think what the Center for Digital Storytelling would say is a good story, especially a good personal story, changes you. You know, like, you know, a friend of mine who's a journalist, you know, says like a story has characters and they change, you know, or they change something else. You know, and I think, you know, I think that might be something very basic to storytelling. I mean, I'm not a script writer or, you know, but I think a story that someone can imagine themselves having a place in the story, I think I mean, like, that's something I'm always thinking about as a preacher is, you know, how do I help someone step into whatever story we're talking about? You know, and the theory being that the story is going to resonate if you can sort of plunk yourself down into it. And I think some of the best stories, I don't know that it's a requirement, but I think some of the best stories give us an accessible way in to sort of empathize strongly. And then in the midst of that, like, take us somewhere, I think. I don't know.
So is that basically the technical with these stories? Along with, you have the characters, you have the entry ways, you have.
I mean, I think so. You know, I mean, like, I mean, hell, we've got, you know, $1 billion Broadway musical about Alexander Hamilton. You know, like, you know, there was Chernow first, and then Miranda, like, found a compelling story there, and it's a story about, like, change. You know, like, you know, impoverished immigrant, you know, becomes one of the most powerful people in the country, and then becomes not, you know, in many ways. The fall is as interesting as the rise in that one. Yeah, I kind of think that you can tell a story about just about anything, but I think there are probably some pieces that have to be there.
Yeah. What are those pieces that's still hard?
Yeah, and I think I try to think about it in terms of characters and change, but there are probably other ways to think about it too.
That must be to make something meaningful.
Yeah.
To make you empathize with
Yeah.
the situation.
Yeah.
And get into in a deep level.
Yeah. I used to listen to a lot of script writers podcasts. I just found it really interesting to hear writers reflecting on their craft. And the thing that they're always talking about is create a character that people like, and then don't give them the thing that they want. You know, and, you know, they talk about, like, well, that whole season of whatever show was about this character wanting this, and us making it take as long as possible for the character to get that thing, and then usually in them getting it, it sets off some new thing that they want or don't want, or whatever the case may be. But that seemed to be the dominant way that a lot of people in that world talked about storytelling. Was yeah.
In movies and musicians.
Yeah.
You also see how you're thinking, no, I don't want that to happen to him, but you know that it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's the musicals. That's the "I Wish" song. You know, the beginning of the musical. There's always the "I Wish," and then the show's about them trying to get it. And
that is an interesting.
Thanks for coming. Yeah.
So you will have more workshops on portfolio, because I really need that too.
Yeah, mine's up there.
Those are the dates.
Yeah.
No. The sign in the lower right hand corner with the question mark on it.
Okay.
It's like the next one.
I like how the two connect. How they worship.
Yeah, that was
forced to connect it. I was just
that was cool.
I was thinking about it, like, you know.
Yeah.
Like, why couldn't a story be a part of the portfolio?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Realize how, you know, the medium has a lot of strengths that maybe words alone can't, or maybe you're better at telling stories through digital.
Yeah.
As opposed to just that way, you know?
Yeah.
So there's lots of inroads, I think.
Yeah.
I'm very curious.
Yeah. What I find really compelling about this is, you know, obviously, in my world of, you know, basically trying to help people sort of form religious identity. I mean, that's more or less my job. Stories have like a very particular role to play in that. And so religious people, I think, tend to think that they're good storytellers, and they're almost universally not. And I think the constraints of the medium force you to like get to the thing. You know, I think that's, especially in like personal storytelling, I think the temptation is to tell every stop along the way. You know, it's like to give a full account rather than to say, what is the point of this story and what elements do I need to paint that arc, but not, you know, give a blow by blow of everything that happened. You know, the journey is important, but, you know, for it to be powerful to share, it has to be abridged, and abridged according to some criteria. Anyway.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, man. Learn something every day. Success?
No.